Hello, and welcome to the ALCTS webinar on Library Services and Learning Management Systems. I'm Erin Elzy, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenters today are John Burke and Beth Tumbleson, both from the Gardner-Harvey Library on the Middleton Regional Campus of Miami University. John is the director of Gardner-Harvey, a past president of the Academic Library Association of Ohio, and a current board member of OhioNet. He holds an MS in Library Science from the University of Tennessee and a BA in History from Michigan State University. John has worked in public services, instruction, collection development, website design, and systems. Beth is assistant director of Gardner-Harvey Library. She earned her MS in Library Science from Simmons School of Library Science and MA in Church History from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. She also earned a BA from Dickinson College. Beth has worked in academic, high school, and corporate libraries. She currently works in distance library services, instruction, collection development, and academic integrity. John and Beth both bring much expertise to today's topic, and we're fortunate to have them with us today. A few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise, and we do not have interactive chat capabilities. You may, however, comment on today's presentation using Twitter. The hashtag is ALCTSCE. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so if you have questions for John and Beth, please type them into the question box on your screen. We will have time for Q&A after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides shortly after the presentation concludes. And now, here's John. There will be a slight delay as we change presenters.
All right, well, thank you, Erin, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Very glad to be talking with you today about library services and learning management systems. I'm John, and you'll be hearing from my colleague Beth in just a bit. We are both located on the one of the regional campuses of Miami University. We're actually in Middletown, Ohio, which is about halfway between Cincinnati and Dayton. Today we'll cover 5 elements of our topic. A look at the larger picture of learning and management systems. Then we'll look at how the library can interact with the LMS. Then we'll take a turn at what library collections and resources can be used in the LMS. Follow up with how copyright and fair use impact the use of that content. And take a look at what our role should be in making library services available in the LMS for students and faculty. We're going to start out in this direction by asking you to complete a poll. So we're going to bring up poll number 1. And what we'd particularly like to know here is how you interact with the LMS in your library setting. So we're going to take a look at poll number 1, and I'd like you to select any or all of the options that you use when interacting with the LMS. We've got several things on, so just take a moment to choose your options. We have several different methods on there, looking at whether you might be involved at actually administering the LMS or have administrative rights to the LMS. Might also be embedded in course sites, as in providing research resources, library instruction. Could also be locating course content. Might be teaching some credit courses. And we did offer the option that you may not use the LMS. Just kind of curious to see if anyone will choose that. All right, well, if everybody's had a chance to answer there then, let's go ahead to the results. Taking a look there, it looks like a fair number, really kind of even numbers on being embedded within the course sites and locating course content, but a fair number not using the LMS directly, so very good. All right, well, good mix of people's familiarity here, and we hope to inform those of you who have not used the LMS as much, but also provide some good information for those of you that are using it for various actions. All right, well, let's move on to the next slide then. So I did want to talk next about our library experience a bit, talk about what we've done with regard to the LMS. We have an interesting situation in that Miami University has actually transitioned between 3 different LMSs in about a 5-year period. So we began working with Blackboard, spent about 5 years using Sakai, and then moved now into our 3rd year with Canvas. So we've seen a lot of different systems. We, and here I include Beth and myself and another librarian of ours, began working as embedded librarians in 2009, and we are regularly added to 40 or more courses each semester to share library resources and answer research questions from students. Get a lot of those. We also do work with our e-learning unit. They're known as eCampus here at Miami. The instructional designers of that unit often need help locating accessible PDFs for different articles or book chapters that that instructors would like to use. So we do assist with that as well, and those items then do get placed in the LMS. We also have a service where we convert library-owned DVDs and VHS tapes into streaming video and actually link those within Canvas as well. And then there are times where we will need to purchase specific products, either streaming video items or specific ebooks that are used for readings or for text materials, and place those into courses. And that's usually a situation where a faculty member might contact us or an instructional designer might contact us. We'll seek out the item and then add it in. And a big part of what we've been taking on over the years, but especially lately with some renewed vigor, is promoting the use of open educational resources and open textbooks to our faculty. There's a university-wide effort underway, and on our campus too, we've been really trying to connect with faculty, especially a number of them who are quite interested in this, and see how we can assist them in locating open sources to use. So that's a number of directions we go with the LMS at our library. Now, talking about the LMS in general, giving a bit of an overview here. One thing I will say is that the phrase LMS, Learning Management System, is very common within North America. We have also run into the term Virtual Learning Environment, or VLE, which is used quite a bit in Europe and a bit in Asia. So you may see that term showing up in literature as well. And the main idea with an LMS or a VLE is to place all needed course materials, assignments, discussions, anything else that an instructor might need or students might need for a course, place that all in one place so they're easy to access and easy to find. And we see them used both in true online classes that are fully online. We do see a fair amount of hybrid classes that may have a face-to-face portion or element to them. And we also do see cases where they are used quite extensively with face-to-face courses too. So not a problem there. The situation is that many instructors will find ways to utilize online materials in their courses, no matter how they're offering the course. So even if they're reading in person, they're still posting assignments through the LMS and so on. And I would say at Miami, the vast majority of our courses do have a Canvas course site, even if they're just posting the syllabus, posting grades. So that's a fairly regular thing that we hear back from students, and we see in our own experience working with faculty. They're using them quite throughout. Now, in terms of general faculty reactions to the use of the LMS, there were a couple of EDUCAUSE studies, took a look at recent EDUCAUSE studies from this year that do reflect broad use of the LMS by faculty and generally satisfaction with the LMS on the part of students. A sizable percentage of faculty do see the LMS as crucial both for teaching and learning. And in the student study, you get a sense here with the listed items of the types of things that students are seeing the LMS used for. So that's what faculty are having them do for submitting assignments, accessing course content, and engaging with their instructors. So a fair amount of that. Here are 2 other studies, one by EDUCAUSE and another by Inside Higher Ed, that highlight common uses of the LMS by faculty. You'll see that high percentages of faculty are using the LMS to provide course content. So 82% in the top survey, 60% in the lower survey. They're slightly different categories of course content being spoken about there, but does get into the element that is something that they do provide. Now, a bit of a background on the LMS industry and the market that's out there. The 5 LMSs that are listed on the left are the most commonly used ones in North American higher education. These are the ones that have the most installations, the most students involved in them. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The key element, this was recently reported that the industry is thought to be about a $5 billion industry, and there was some questioning of that in higher education circles as to whether that was accurate. Was there really that much going on with LMSs? And it turns out that that $5 billion figure is actually reflective of not only academic library or academic use of LMSs, but also corporate LMS usage. That's a much huger market. About 2 to 4 billion of that $5 billion figure is corporate uses of the LMS. But still a sizable amount of activity in the academic sector. And the options that you'll have in LMSs are often divided into 2 groups, into subscription services, which allow you to make large modifications to the system only centrally, but they do provide a lot of support for the subscription charge that you pay. But then there also are open source systems, which on the one hand are free to install. They are very free in a general sense to install, at least to access the software. They do offer a lot of flexibility at the college or university level in terms of modifying the system to work just as you would like it. But they do require a larger local IT staff to maintain. So there are trade-offs in both directions. And of the 5 listed here, Blackboard, Canvas, and Brightspace are essentially subscription-based services. Moodle and Sakai are open source systems. So that takes us to poll number 2. We're going to ask for a little bit of information from you now as to which LMS you are using in your institution, and recognize that people might be using multiple systems. That's been a popular thing over the years to have multiple systems in place. I did just list the 5 from the prior slide as options, and if by chance you happen to use a different system than these, I'd be curious to have you post that in the questions or in the chat, just for us to record that. But curious to see what your primary LMS option is. So we'll take a few seconds to make that choice, and then we'll see what your results are. All right, looks like we've got the results available now. And interestingly, following what I just mentioned briefly already, Blackboard very much leading the way, very clearly. Canvas, though, also quite a high percentage as well, and then Brightspace. So those are the ones that are really out there, as people are choosing more of those subscription system ones. Very much follows Miami's path through the system, going from Blackboard, going into an open source option, and then coming back to Canvas. So not surprising there. All right, excellent. Well, we're going to move on to the next slide then. And what I wanted to show in this one, very involved imagery here. Just want to make a couple of key points on it. This is a very nice chart put together by a gentleman named Phil Hill, who tracks the LMS industry, both for higher ed and not. And this actually shows something of a historical development of the LMSs over the last 20 years, from 1997 to the present. And just to point out the kind of the key things here, the gray line or lines, the gray swath of the chart, as we move over toward the right, toward the current day, that is Blackboard and the various systems that join together to form Blackboard at various points over history. They do, by all means, have the largest chunk of the US and Canadian market. Then Moodle in the yellow, again, has a fairly sizable section of the market, but starting to dip a bit. Canvas is in the red, and they have, by all means, the fastest growing share, and again, getting to be ahead of Moodle. Then Brightspace is in the orange down the very bottom of the chart, still growing, relatively small. And then Sakai is in the light blue color, which is just up above the yellow between Canvas and Moodle, and that is beginning to shrink a bit. So we're seeing that movement in them. But just intriguing to see the development of these and how they have combined together. In many cases, you had a lot of systems gobbling up other systems to make this work. One thing that you'll notice at the very top of the chart is that brown line, and that is are the other LMSs, systems other than the 5 that I mentioned for the most part. That seems to be a shrinking group overall. And then the green line as well, just to point that one out, that is also a kind of category of system known as homegrown systems, which many institutions have used at one point or another. And those systems, again, are nearly gone at this point. Not very many homegrown systems remaining. Now, to see this information represented a bit more boxily, just to show you a sense of the market, you can get a sense here that Blackboard in the gray, Canvas in the red, really taking up a huge percentage of the North American higher education market. And again, significant feat still by Brightspace, much smaller by Sakai and Moodle. And then looking at this a bit more broadly, this actually also brings in European use of the LMSs. You'll see here that the yellow, those top 3 lines are all from Europe, different sizes of institution by FTE. Lots of activity by Moodle at all levels in Europe. If we come on down to the bottom 3 rows, we do see much less activity there by Moodle, though in institutions with under 2,500 FTE, still a fair chunk of the market taken up by Moodle. But then if you go to the very last 2 lines, looking at Blackboard and Canvas in the gray and the red, much bigger piece there. So intriguing to see the hold on the market, and that does reflect, again, the poll that we took as well in terms of the ones that we're using. Well, now we're going to turn to Beth to discuss LMS features and tools.
Thank you. Here's a picture of a content creation box in Canvas. And the Canvas tools on the left are similar to most other LMS. So librarians might add library items to announcements or the syllabus, modules, or discussions. And librarians are added under people. Assessments are listed in grades, assignments, and quizzes. And you, the instructor, can communicate with groups in collaborations or via web conferencing. And faculty usually add content in pages and files. And there you see a content creation box where you have icons to either insert, embed, or hyperlink content as you need. You want to be in the LMS because, as we said earlier, some students may never go to the library or even visit the library website. Unfortunately, students seem to prefer to use their library content directly in their LMS courses. The ALA/ACRL Standards for Distance Library Services 2016 mandate equitable access for distance students. So LMS embedded librarians can collaborate with faculty members and place electronic resources in their courses. Librarians also teach credit courses or co-teach. And at Miami University, we teach information literacy, media literacy, and university orientation credit courses. Librarians may just be providing course materials requested by e-learning or faculty. You can ask the LMS administrator for access to the LMS or become an administrator on your campus, as was the case at Westminster College in Pennsylvania. Getting into the LMS may rely on a technology solution, such as writing a script to link the most relevant LibGuide to every LMS course, as was done at Duke University. At the very minimum, have an LMS library website tab. The LMS roles differ in what the librarian is able to access and do. They range from student to observer. The ideal role is teacher. The next best is designer, where you access everything but the gradebook. And the LMS administrator can create a librarian custom role. Here are a few of our favorite things to put in LMS courses selected from library databases, video clips, ebooks, articles, images, tutorials. Librarians set up and maintain the Discovery service. It's our world. In the Discovery service, users find and connect to electronic items by clicking the Connect to link in the record or using the permalink. However, it's more convenient for students to find and read course materials placed in their LMS courses. In this module, we link a copyrighted article from the New York Times and embed a YouTube video, such as this one by another university library. It's an open educational resource. Because library budgets are typically flat or decreasing, we want to look at various financial considerations. Is it better to license a title for 1 year or multiple years? Is it better to buy the item to ensure permanent access to back files, for example? Or how many users will need to access the item at the same time? Is it a required reading? In our situation, in a history and also nursing course, we found demand was high and we increased our licenses accordingly as we interacted with students and faculty. And another question to consider, is it possible to share expenses with other units? Okay. More cost considerations, maybe your acquisition method is an important factor. Whether your ebooks are selected by a subject librarian or a patron-driven acquisition model or an evidence-based acquisition. In the PDA model, buys are automatically triggered based on the number of views, time spent viewing, or the number of downloads. Sometimes costs can be shared with other campus units or the State Library Consortium. Accessibility compliance can increase costs if closed captioning has to be added at your expense. Database content changes may force additional library orders when a title you need is suddenly removed from a database. In theory, LMS provides a 24/7 access to course content worldwide. The reality can be less impressive, however. Sometimes students are using cell phones to complete courses. Sometimes accessibility issues cause problems in teaching and learning if you are missing a tag or closed captioning or transcripts need to be added. Internet interruptions may happen more often than we'd like due to servers or databases that go down or cut cables or storms that bring down electrical wiring. So we have to contend with these challenges. Also, remote access can fail due to authentication or logging on issues or technology problems like speed or bandwidth, or even international government policies or infrastructure if there's censorship or intermittent internet access. So sometimes rather than using licensed or purchased materials, we turn to open access content. So publicly funded materials from the Library of Congress are wonderful, or collaborative projects like the Digital Public Library of America can fit your bill. We can also use educational nonprofits and what they create in our courses, open access online research products that are free of access restrictions and free of many use restrictions are helpful. And then, as John said earlier, these open educational resources are growing in use. They're items in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by youth. It is possible to link an ebook, a book chapter, a video clip, or even one image in an LMS course. And publishers are promoting this deep linking to their content to be used in faculty websites or syllabi, LibGuides, or the LMS. And publishers provide special linking in the LMS. So if you're using Credo tutorials, for instance, they will supply you LTI links for using Canvas. So publishers are expecting libraries to use their content in these various learning management systems. It's a selling point. And tips in linking content: you do want to cite your source. Linking is the safest legal method. And using a library's items permalink is best for user access. And now we're going to turn back to John to continue with some of our questions with Teach Act and fair use.
All right, well, thank you, Beth. And indeed, we did want to say a few words related to copyright. I know Beth picked up on a few elements there in terms of the options that database providers and publishers prefer us to use as we're linking materials from anywhere, but particularly if we think about it from the LMS. I do want to give a little bit of background on how to think about copyright questions as we consider this particular purpose of providing materials related to teaching. I would say that as we think about copyright, it all depends on what shoes you're standing in. If we're thinking about copyright from the standpoint of faculty members or librarians or students at times, we may look at copyright as a very restrictive situation, something that's a barrier between us and the use of the information we'd like to have. On the other hand, obviously, if we're someone who's created a work, well, we do have an interest in protecting that work, making sure that it's not taken over by someone else and passed off as their work. And yet, as a creator of information, we do want it to be available and be used. And I think it's really trying to thread this needle between really being focused on the protection of information and the freedom to use information that is so difficult and can be really tricky for us at times. I think there's that there is a way to make this work, and I think what we need to find within libraries is the ability to provide some guidance to faculty and certainly the students as well as they're using information. So I wanted to do a bit of discussion on that and take forth some principles that I hope will be of help to you, or some information that I hope that you can use as well. First of all, I wanted to show this poster. This was actually posted on a school librarian listserv about a week and a half ago, and it was very nicely shared with the idea that it explained how fair use works, and that it's something that librarians could use in various settings to, post in their libraries or post by the copier or share with teachers and so on. And I'm not picking on this particular example as the worst thing going out there or anything like that by any means. It's definitely not trying to cast any aspersions on the person who put it together. But I wanted to bring this up as an example of the kinds of guidelines or checklists that we sometimes come up with ourselves or have passed down to us by other entities or other people in terms of what does fair use really say, or what does copyright really require of us. And the thing of it, the thing with this particular poster and with some of those checklists, really all of those checklists, is that they're not really based on copyright law or the Copyright Act as it has stood since 1976 when it was last updated. the rules regarding fair use are not directly covered here at all. That some of the restrictions in place here that, well, it's okay to make single copies of things if you're preparing to teach. There are times when you can make multiple copies of an item, and so on. These are restrictions that are not, again, as I say, perfectly reflective of the actual documents they address. This actually also mentions Library of Congress Copyright Circular number 21, which does give some further explanation of copyright and fair use. There actually was another person on the listserv from the ALE Copyright Office who spoke up to say that they really thought that people should examine that document before following these exact rules. So I would say this kind of list, again, is something that I think is very, very helpful from the standpoint of it gives us a guideline to go by, but it may not exactly capture the heart of the law as it stands, or from another standpoint, the fair use principles that we are able to draw from copyright law. And this, I love this quote, came from a book from a few years back, 6 years back, that looked at re-examining fair use and looking at how we could actually, by looking at the law itself and looking at ways it has been applied over time, we actually might have a bit more freedom in fair use than necessarily having to hew to the protection side of things if we're looking at those as opposing sides here. But I love this quote, or this quote, in that it does point out why we like the checklist. They're very easy. They will give us a way of checking off and saying, okay, well, I'm only using 4 pages of this article, or I'm only using 2 chapters of this book, or 30% of this document, or whatever it might be. And again, it does save us having to think this through with fair use and having to think through the our own calculation of whether we are meeting fair use principles. And I like the further part of the quote where it says that professors are fully capable of making decisions about what to post to their own class sites. And I would hope that we as librarians would also be fully capable of making these decisions too, or being able to advise people. And I think that is a very helpful role for us, which we'll get into in a bit more in a second here. But it gives us the opportunity to make these reasoned decisions and make good choices about what is actually allowed. To bring this up, I don't by any means mean to read this or to have you read the full thing, but I just wanted to bring up this slide. This is the entire section of the Copyright Act that actually covers fair use. This is the entire thing. It's all in section 107, and this is a bit more brief than you might think if you had read lists such as the one we looked at a moment ago that had the various percentages and so on in it. Nowhere in here will you find those questions about how many minutes are we watching of a video, or how many chapters are we going to stick in our course site, or anything like that. And of course, it doesn't even mention our course site. This was put together back in 1976, so this is essentially 40 years old, that law, and there are as much need as people have addressed over the years of updates to it. But again, it doesn't give us direct commentary in the way that we might like in terms of the checklist. And instead, what it gives us are really 4 factors, 4 key things we can use when we are assessing our copyright use or the copyright use of a faculty member in terms of what is able for them to use in their course site. So to bring out those factors, we're essentially looking at 4 things every time we consider whether an article, a section of an ebook, whatever else someone might wish to include can actually be included. It might be images, might be video, it could be other things. So essentially we're looking at the purpose and character of the use, and this is the one that we often have the easiest time with in education, because typically the point in mind here is for an educational purpose, that's the reason. As part of a class. We also look at that with who is able to see this thing. This is not a situation where faculty members are going to post articles that anyone on campus can see or anyone in a large geographical area can see. It's really going to be just their class typically, or a couple of sections of that class. So there is something there in the character of the work, the character of the use that is different than if we were going to send this out to everyone in email or text or something like that. Also, we look at the work itself. Is it a published work or an unpublished work? Might change the nature of how it's being used. It may be a work that's really intended for educational purposes or for reference purposes, and that might change the how that work is considered. It's something that might be meant to be shared in an educational setting or educational process. We might also, again, consider the amount to be used. And again, we have no hard and fast guidelines here. The idea is for us to consider, is this a full item or part of an item, or to what degree is it important if it's a full item? So it might be such that we could say, well, we're going to use 100% of an article that we're going to link from the classroom, and that way we're not even really thinking about fair use there because we're linking to it. It's not even actually in the course site. On the other hand, if an instructor, and we've had several instructors say that to us, that they would rather save a PDF of the article and link it in the classroom directly, and you could argue under fair use that is still acceptable, especially as we get through the full 4 factors. But even though that's the full article, that amount might still be fitting in this case. On the other hand, that amount question has often come up with more lengths and percentages and numbers of chapters and things like that too, but that's the area to consider. In the end, we're really looking at market effect. Is this going to affect the sale of an item? And it does seem that, again, for many educational uses, it's not such that we would necessarily have anyone would be buying individual copies of the article necessarily, or would be using individual copies of the article, or at least there would not be very many, so it might not affect the market in a large degree. So those are considerations to make. But I did mainly want to mention the 4 factors and mention the fair use principles, because it is something for us to look at in every situation and say, how much of an impact is this particular item having? And then if I start to look at that adding up over the course, is it something where I really have to think about a different route to take, or is it something I can use under fair use?
And just one point there is that according to people who think about this topic often and in depth, they are saying that nonprofit educational transformative uses are likely fair use. And when there are questions, it's usually decided on a case-by-case basis. It's not against this checklist, as you were saying.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, definitely. It's not a sadly, not an easy thing to do, but on the other hand, because we know it's not as easy as that, we do have some flexibilities. There are different cases, different needs and uses, so that does help there. The other element I just wanted to bring in to mention here is the Teach Act. The Teach Act came about in 2002 as essentially a method of extending fair use from the physical classroom, such as pictured here, into the online classroom. And in some ways, the elements of the Teach Act do give some further clarity about online teaching and online use of course materials. But in some ways, it really it's an odd fit, and especially as we've gone now 15 years beyond the Teach Act, the uses we're seeing, the kinds of things we're doing in the LMS and elsewhere, maybe not map exactly well to a physical classroom. So if we think about elements of the Teach Act which would allow you to use video, let's say, as long as it would fit into the components and the use period that you would see in the physical classroom, that might work well if you're doing a live interactive online class, so that if you were going to have a 50-minute class in the classroom and you're going to show 40 minutes of a video, great, you can do that in a physical classroom. You can do the same thing in an interactive online classroom, so show the same 40 minutes. The problem, though, is that so much online education is asynchronous. It's happening at people's own time. So using the Teach Act, can you really post that 40-minute video and just let people use it whenever they want to? Well, specifically under the Teach Act, no, you probably can't do that. And what I've heard, and this is a great example of this from folks working in this vein and trying to understand copyright in the online environment, is that there are times when the Teach Act works for you and really helps clarify the use you might have, and there's other uses, such as the one I was mentioning, where it doesn't really help. It doesn't really clarify. What we'd want to do, I think, in that case, is fall back to a fair use 4-factor interpretation and think, okay, if we're going to use this video and we're going to post it in a way that my students can see over 3 weeks in the course whenever they're able to get in and watch it, is that going to pass the 4-factor test or not? So that's really the consideration to make there. So TCHAC can be useful, can be helpful, but again, still doesn't quite give us that sense of checklist or guidelines that we would really like, perhaps. And then just to confuse matters more, because that's seemingly my purpose here, but no, just to add another element into this, we also have to talk a little bit about the issue of licenses. And we see with fair use, of course, fair use starts at a time when we didn't really have a whole lot of electronic resources or sources we were dealing with. We were dealing very much with paper and print and so forth. That worked quite well in that environment to have fair use, and we have carried fair use further into the electronic age. But what's happened at the same time is that our vendors, our database providers, publishers have found other ways to try to guide our use, curtail our use in some ways, no matter whichever verb you'd like to use there. And essentially, by the licenses we sign, it may well restrict our use of full text resources, whether it's articles or ebooks or whatever it might be, video. So one thing we need to pay attention to is we're looking at the license agreements we sign to access a new full text article database, let's say, is what are we allowed to do under that license? There are ways in which you can write the license to actually restrict what we might otherwise just kind of expect. That's something we can do with it. That's a fair use of this. But actually under the license, it might be restricted. And something that comes up with this, it's not directly a fair use thing, but a similar issue is interlibrary loan is sometimes restricted under database licenses for full text articles provided in there. And that's something we want to be aware of and just taking note of. With all of this, I will say there's not perfect clarity on it. We can certainly read the license restriction. We can certainly argue against the license restriction and say we'd rather not sign this. We're not going to sign this deal with you. We can reject it in that way. What we on the one hand, unfortunately, have not seen are enough case law being developed relating to specific cases where faculty members use item X in a certain way, and is that allowed under a license that was signed, or are they interpreting fair use factors correctly or not? The problem is if we're not seeing, we'd rather not see lawsuits. We want to avoid lawsuits by all means. I'm not saying we want them, but it is a situation that unless we see those cases and we see publishers coming forward, such as they did again in a reserves case, in the Georgia State case, we're not going to see decisions come out that really give us case law or clarity to work with going forward. But that being said, I think it's very key for us to not operate out of fear, not operate just out of the idea of avoiding a confrontation, but to see what is possible, what does seem to hold up well under fair use principles. And I think there's a lot more freedom there than we think for. What I also wanted to just touch on here too were the sort of an alternative option that's out there in terms of licensing, and that is Creative Commons licenses. We're seeing more and more of this show up within OER resources, open textbooks, many things that are just shared freely under Creative Commons licenses. The nice thing about Creative Commons licenses versus copyright is that you can actually condition how items are shared. You can make it fully available, just say, hey, this is out here, anybody can use it, but you can also restrict some things on it. I listed 4 things on the slide here. And I think we're starting to see real movement in more individuals, particularly with teaching materials and things like that, sharing it out under Creative Commons license, where we might say, well, I just want attribution. I just want you to mention that you got this from me. Or I want you to, feel free that you can make something out of this, or you can use it, but I want you to share whatever you make out of it the same way I shared this with you, to keep the spirit of that going forward. Certainly there are items that people put non-commercial uses on, if they want to restrict that to more nonprofit or educational use. And then there are people who, again, will restrict that you can make a derivative, that you can transform their object. You're allowed to use that picture, but don't modify it anyway, crop it, whatever. You can still make it available. So more to cover on that, but just wanted to mention that that's something that is flexible, a flexible method for licensing options in another way, aside from copyright. And thought we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, at least briefly, some of the copyright or content management systems that are out there. I know there was an ALCTS webinar, I think back in September, on Civics, the summon tool from ProQuest. And that is actually a tool that will help you organize items that would be found through your discovery layer, so articles and ebook chapters and whatever else, for course use, and also would allow interaction with the Copyright Clearance Center to see if additional licenses or so forth would be needed to have those used in course settings. There's a similar product through Ex Libris, also with ProQuest Leganto. Those are being kind of developed somewhat in tandem. There's a similar thing through EBSCO called the EDS Curriculum Builder. It actually does not have the Copyright Clearance Center connection or the licensing connection, but it does allow you to, again, allow you or a faculty member to choose items out of your discovery services, various items that you might have out there, and keep track of them, organize them so that they would then be connected into an LMS for making them available to the group. I will say the Copyright Clearance Center is the resource we often find ourselves going to if we do find that we need a specific license for an item, so on. But again, they work for the publishers, so they're not necessarily the best people to go to for pure guidance on the issue, but they are enabled to make those deals as you need to if you decide that this is a 4-factor test in which we do need to seek a license. Well, that really gets us into the question of what role we as librarians can play in this process. And we're already involved in this, whether we're directly using the LMS or not. It's a situation in which we're having to come up with some explanation of where we go from here, how we can make this better. I love this image because I feel as librarians we're used to wearing many hats, and boy, here's some more hats we could possibly put on in this process. So in terms of some possibilities here for making the situation better, I want to just list off six things to keep in mind. There's a bit of a summary of some of the things we've addressed here, but we are going to be seen quite often by faculty, by students as well, as sources for course content. People are going to turn to us, and we want to be that source and continue to add items to our collections that can be used in courses. But I think along with that, we really want to be able to give some guidance on how it can best be used. So again, whether we're giving people guidance on how to make those direct links to specific articles or direct links to chapters of ebooks, whatever it might be, we're able to give that information. And I think even though I've said people will recognize this as a source of content, we also want to make sure the faculty really do know what we have, that we're continuing to connect with them in various ways, both directly with individuals we interact with, more broad promotions that we might do, connections we have with people who are new to campus and new to the faculty. We want to make sure that they're aware that we do have resources that can actually be used in their courses. We coupled with this, I think, is the key element of working with e-learning, our e-learning unit, and those instructional designers. And again, they'll turn to us if they're looking for more materials or need assistance with items. And again, we get quite a bit of that. That's just really been very helpful for us. We feel like we're all getting on the same page to some degree, and really working in great cooperation and collaboration. I do think getting ourselves up to speed on copyright and fair use principles is very helpful, because we can then provide that kind of assistance and help whether it's an instructional designer or faculty members talk that through and think about whether this use actually would count as a fair use, because again, many times it really may. And that turn that we're making now, though again, many people have made it already. It's not a completely new thing by any means, but that turn we're making toward OER is really going to be important. If we can help locate items for faculty members, help them with any issues or questions they have about linking them in, that is going to be huge. Again, it takes away some of the issues we have over copyrighted items, and the vast majority of cases, it's really a free option. It saves our students money, saves on textbook costs, things like that. The big thing we really want to urge you to do here is to become a presence in the LMS, to really get involved in the LMS, know what's going on in there, find ways that, again, you can interact. That embedded librarian presence has been very, very helpful to us from a reference and instructional standpoint, but I think it's also great just to be able to interact with faculty, get an idea of what's going on in their courses, and help them out in many ways. The thing to keep in mind is that faculty are posting things in their courses, whether we're helping them or not. I'd rather be helping them. I'd rather be giving them some advice and guidance on that. So we urge you to get out there and be involved. Did want to mention, we did put together some resources as we were preparing this webinar, and want to share those with you. As the slides go out to you, there will be a nice link in here, and this goes to a Google Doc that links to or lists all of those resources. I did point out one particular resource from Kenneth Cruz on copyright law for librarians and educators. This great edition. He actually has a new edition I hear coming out either late this year or early next year, so be looking for that too. And that'll take us to questions.
All right, thank you, John and Beth. This has been a really great session so far. So now we'll move into the question period. If you haven't done so, please take time to enter your questions into the question box on your GoToWebinar panel. So we'll start with a couple that we have regarding reserves and copyright, since that's what we just wrapped up here. We have one attendee who says they worked for an institution that at one time had an online request form for faculty to submit e-reserves requests where they were required to indicate if they determined copyright status. Have you done anything like that?
We have had actually a very similar situation to that now a number of years ago at Miami. I think about 5 or 6 years ago. That was very much the case here. So we would have faculty request items to be placed on electronic reserve, and it was actually a system that we did run out of the libraries. And I think at that time, especially as the Georgia State case was coming into play and all that, the libraries really stepped away from that role. And it's something that we now are doing much more on a almost one-to-one advising with instructional designers and faculty, rather than seeing that be a system that we host in any way. So that was a situation where I think there was a feeling that there was a liability question there. You know, what are we getting ourselves into if we're just taking faculty members, judgments on their own? Will we get questioned by publishers and so on? And not that we really had any direct interactions that way, but that was something that we did step away from. And again, it's in some ways I perfectly understand why we did that, but in other ways now we really don't know what's going on. It's really left to the faculty to post, and that's where I feel like we need to be involved where we can.
Great, thank you. And then somewhat related to that, are there still cases where you use print reserves and would put links to a catalog record in the LMS, or are you entirely just doing e-reserves now for the LMS integration?
We have print reserves, books and textbooks and such, but very few articles, if any.
Right. The articles have really dropped away. I'd say there are still some book reserves that we do use, and a few even a few old VHS tapes. So mostly DVDs that we have on reserve, but very few of those. We've really tried to make them available online as much as possible, just make it easier for students, and again to really fit the nature of the classes. Given that we're dealing with a lot of face-to-face classes still, though, too, we do have people who will come in the library to use them.
All right, thank you. And then we have two questions that are kind of related. One attendee is particularly interested in the aspects of embedded librarians and librarians as co-teaching in the LMS, so they're looking for some elaboration. And then also, how do you get faculty to buy into the idea of an embedded librarian?
We started this about 8 years ago, and we just made a blanket invitation. Would you like to collaborate with a librarian? And the word of mouth marketing has helped us. If someone in the department or teaching a given course is using a librarian and hears good things, then they might also collaborate with you. So you develop working relationships. So really it's been asking face-to-face or via email or through library orientations or newsletters. So it's ongoing semester by semester marketing. And now our embedded librarianship in the LMS is more than our one-shot instruction in the physical classroom. So once they see, I think they get better papers or research products or presentations when a librarian is linking scholarly databases in that discipline, and instead of a student finding online something, I think the faculty are pleased. So that was pretty much our marketing effort, and we have not been overwhelmed. We have steady use of the service.
Yeah, it's really grown, and I mean, I will credit Beth with that. I think she is a very diligent marketer, both you know, person to person and through our various communications. Something that's really grown such that it has tipped the balance. One thing we do is we track how many classes we're embedded in year to year, and then also how many one-shot instruction sessions we do year to year. And over the last 2 years, we've actually done more embedded classes than we have done the one-shot instruction sessions. We really feel like that's becoming the main way we interact. You know, we'd like to have everybody, but we recognize some of the strain of having everybody if we actually got all the classes in that way. But we've had really great growth, and again, I'll say, Beth, for some departments, especially nursing, we've had a really big take up on this. So.
Hey, great, thank you. So we do have time for one more question. And would you consider it fair use to post articles to Canvas that you have electronic database access to?
I would say, so if we're talking about, you know, posting the actual article, I would really say yes, and that's the differentiation that gets called into play every now and then. We will mention to faculty certainly that they could link to that database, and that would be you know, the surest, you know, holding to the licensing, holding the copyright, the surest way to follow the guidelines, follow the law. But on the other hand, I really actually would consider it to be fair use that if we already have access to the database, anyone could go out and get access to that article. If it's being placed in the classroom for that individual class to use, so those, you know, however many individuals, it seems to me to really be in keeping. It's not really affecting the market at all. It's a situation where it's essentially the instructor saying, I want to make this easier on my students to get right to the article and not have to go out and find it on their own. From a librarian perspective, maybe I'd like them to go out and find it on their own and learn how it's done and all that, but I can definitely see the value of doing that on the instructor's part. So I would side on the fair use side with that.
Okay, great. Thanks, both of you. We do have a few remaining questions that were submitted, and our presenters have kindly offered to answer them in writing, and those answers will be sent to our attendees via email. And we're so glad that all of you could be with us today. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan future events. The email will also include links to today's slides and recording, and you now have the opportunity to receive a certificate of attendance. That information will also be in the email. Thanks to our presenters, John Burke and Beth Tumbleson, and thanks also to members of the Continuing Education Committee, Joseph Nicholson and Joseph Olivares, and to Jazz Lee Coley from the ALCTS office. The support they provide make it possible for us to present these webinars. ALCTS has other continuing education events coming up. We have 4 more webinars this fall, the next one being on securing patron privacy, taking place November 8th. Please see the ALCTS website to register or find more information on these. And we also offer web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long, as well as 2-day email discussions. Our next e-forum will be on November 14th, discussing how we can adapt cataloging workflows to batch processing environments. Check the website for information on these upcoming courses and discussions. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. This will conclude our session.